It started out like any other quiet Saturday morning. The sun was just peeking over the hills behind our house, painting everything in golden light. I had just finished setting up my little farm stand at the edge of our driveway. Same place. It had been for the last 7 months. Tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, fresh eggs from the hens, a few jars of my wife's strawberry jam. A hand-painted wooden sign read, "Local fresh, pay what you can." I liked it that way. It wasn't about making big money. It was just about sharing what we grew with neighbors, meeting people, having good conversations. At first, people seemed to love it. A few stopped just to say hello. Some dropped $1 or $2 in the tin and took a tomato or a jar of jam. One woman even said my cucumbers were better than Whole Foods. I remember smiling at that. Life was simple. But not for long. That morning, while I was laying out the last carton of eggs, a silver SUV pulled up at the curb. A tall man stepped out, wearing a crisp white polo, clipboard in hand, sunglasses too dark for the early hour. He didn't smile. "Didn't even look at the vegetables? You're Robert Adams?" he asked. I nodded. "That's me. I'm Greg, head of a committee for this neighborhood." I wiped my hands on my apron and offered one. He didn't take it. "This setup," he said, pointing at my stand, "isn't in compliance with community guidelines." "You're not authorized to run a commercial operation from your residence." I blinked. "Commercial operation? It's a farm stand. People pay if they want. I'm not even making $100 a week." He didn't budge. "Doesn't matter. Guidelines clearly state no sales from residential properties without HOA approval. And you, Mr. Adams, do not have that approval." I tried to explain, told him I wasn't charging anyone, that we were giving away food most of the time, that we were just trying to share what we grew, but he wasn't interested. He handed me a paper, a formal notice to cease all operations. "By the end of the week or face a fine, you have until Friday," he said, turning back to his SUV. "Otherwise, we'll have to escalate." And with that, he was gone. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my wife, Ellie. I showed her the notice. She didn't say anything at first. Just read it, then folded it slowly and placed it on the table. She took a sip of tea and looked at me. "So they really want to shut it down?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Looks like it." Ellie sat back. "Did you explain it's mostly donation-based?" They didn't care. She was quiet for a moment longer. Then something shifted in her face, calm but firm. She got up and started putting on her shoes. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I need to make a phone call," she said. "An old friend owes me a favor. Now I should tell you something. Ellie's not just any wife. I knew that when I married her. She was kind, gentle, always smiling. But behind that warm face was someone who had built a reputation across the state. Before we moved out here, she was a senior legal analyst for a nonprofit that had taken on some of the biggest zoning cases in the country. She had walked into courtroom after courtroom defending small farms, food stands, seed libraries, you name it. But when we moved to this quiet suburb to slow things down, she hung up her legal hat. Or at least I thought she did. The next morning, I found her at her desk, stacks of papers spread out, laptop open, highlighter in hand. She had printed out the HOA's full list of community bylaws, zoning regulations from the county office, and even past case decisions from the state Supreme Court. I raised an eyebrow. "You're really going for it?" She looked up and smiled. "They want a fight, they'll get one." By Wednesday, Ellie had written up a formal appeal. She delivered it to the HOA office in person with a request to attend the next community meeting. Greg, the HOA president, was not amused. We saw him that evening while walking our dog. He didn't speak to us, but the look he gave us said everything. Friday rolled around. The day the stand was supposed to be shut down. I was nervous. But Ellie, calm as ever, said, "Put the stand up like you always do." "I've got it handled." So I did. I laid out the tomatoes, stacked the eggs, hung the sign. It felt like a quiet act of rebellion. Around 9 a.m., Greg returned, this time with 2 others from the HOA board. All 3 were dressed like they were going to a golf club, clipboards and phones in hand. "You've been warned, Mr. Adams," Greg said. You're now officially in violation. We'll be issuing a fine of $500 effective immediately. I didn't even get a chance to reply. Ellie stepped out of the house, folder in hand. Actually, she said. No, you won't. Greg turned, surprised. Excuse me? Ellie walked right up to them, handed each one a neatly printed document, and said, This is our formal notice. Disputing your claim, citing specific clauses from the HOA bylaws you appear to be misinterpreting. According to your own guidelines, what we are doing qualifies as a non-commercial, occasional use activity under the personal agriculture exemption. Further, county zoning laws override HOA rules in matters of food distribution, and we are fully within those rights. One of the men looked down at the papers. Greg, not even glancing, said, That doesn't matter. You're still in violation. Ellie smiled. It was the kind of smile that said she was just getting started. Greg, she said slowly, you may want to look at page 3, especially the section on unreasonable restrictions on agricultural use. That clause was added in 2019 after a case I personally helped argue, which set a state precedent for homeowner-grown food being exempt from HOA restrictions. You're welcome to challenge it in court, but I guarantee you it will not end in your favor. Greg's face had turned a deep red. You're bluffing, he muttered. Ellie pulled out a business card and handed it to him. Call the number. On the back. That's the lead counsel who drafted the amendment. Tell her Ellie Adams said hello. The silence that followed was almost sweet. The other 2 board members read the document more carefully now. One of them even stepped back. Greg grumbled something under his breath and stormed back to his car. That afternoon, the fine was dropped, and 2 days later we received an email from the HOA stating that, after further review, the farm stand will be allowed to continue as long as it remains donation-based and non-intrusive. We celebrated with fresh strawberry jam and tea on the porch. I asked Ellie, How'd you stay so calm? She looked at me, a twinkle in her eye, because they forgot who I was. After the dust settled from that Friday showdown, things got quiet, almost too quiet. The HOA didn't bother us for a while. No fines, no warnings, no passive-aggressive letters in the mailbox. And for a week or 2, it felt like the storm had passed. I kept setting up the stand every morning, just like before. Some days people stopped by just to talk about what had happened. Others whispered like we had pulled off something legendary. You're the ones who stood up to the, right? One man asked, taking a jar of jam and leaving a 20. Your wife's a lawer or something? Another neighbor asked. She scared them off good. I just smiled. Because there was more truth in that than I could explain, but peace has a funny way of being temporary. About 2 weeks after the notice was dropped, we started noticing strange things. First, someone began leaving negative notes inside the donation box. One was handwritten, just 2 words, This is ugly. Another said, Some of us like order in our neighborhood. We didn't know who was writing them, but the tone was sharp, bitter. We let it go. Then, a few days later, someone knocked over the stand overnight. Eggs smashed on the pavement. Tomatoes crushed, a leg of the wooden frame broken. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate for that. Ellie didn't say anything when she saw it. She just grabbed her toolkit, fixed the stand quietly, and moved on with her day, but I could tell she was taking mental notes that week. One of the HOA board members, not Greg, but another guy named Richard, stopped by while I was unloading. Cucumbers. Look, he said, just between us, you've upset some people. I didn't mean to upset anyone, I said calmly. I'm just growing food. He looked around like he didn't want anyone to hear. Some of the board feels like your wife embarrassed. Greg, and Greg doesn't let things go, I leaned. On the fence post. Is this a warning? He hesitated. It's just ... keep your head down, all right? Some people are talking about new rules. And sure enough, a week later, we received an email, a proposed amendment to the HOA bylaws. No permanent or temporary commercial-like displays may be erected in front-facing yards, including tables, signs, or sales-related structures. It didn't mention us by name, but we knew what it was. The vote was set for the next community meeting. Ellie sat across from me that night, hands folded. She didn't look angry, just focused. The kind of focus I'd only seen a few times before. It was the same look she had when she was building closing arguments in court. They're trying to move the goalpost. She said, they'll vote us out? She nodded. Not if we tell the right story. The week before the meeting, Ellie got to work. She printed flyers with information about what we were doing. How much food had been donated? How many eggs had gone to elderly neighbors for free? She knocked on doors, spoke to people, answered questions. To my surprise, many were on our side. I get fresh greens here every Sunday, one man said. It's the highlight of my week. My daughter loves your jam, a woman added. We're voting to keep it. Some people didn't say much, but they smiled and took the flyer. Others, especially the more formal-looking folks with expensive landscaping and 3-car garages, refused to engage. We don't want a marketplace on our street, one of them said coldly. The night of the HOA meeting, the clubhouse was packed. More people than we'd ever seen show up. Folding chairs lined the back wall. A few neighbors stood near the doorway. Greg stood at the front. In his usual polo and clipboard, he read the amendment in his smooth, rehearsed voice. This is simply to maintain aesthetic standards, he said. This is not targeted. It applies to all homeowners equally. Ellie raised her hand. Greg hesitated. Yes, Mrs. Adams? She stood. Not loud, not aggressive, just composed. I'd like to speak. On behalf of our little stand, she said. Not as a lawyer, but as a neighbor. She walked slowly to the front, holding a folder filled with photos, charts, and stories. Over the last 7 months, we've provided over 400 eggs, 100 jars of jam, and hundreds of vegetables, many of which were given freely to seniors, families, and those who asked for nothing in return. Not for profit, not for business. Just to share what we grow? She turned to face the crowd. This isn't a store, it's a gift. Greg shifted in. His seat. Ellie continued. We've received thank you cards from neighbors. One woman told me it reminded her of her childhood back in Mississippi, where neighbors left baskets of squash on each other's porches. Another said it was the only fresh food she could afford that week. She held up a photo of a little boy, holding a basket of tomatoes, smiling. This isn't clutter. This is community. The room was quiet. Then someone from the back spoke up. Let her keep it. Another voice joined. I get my eggs there every Saturday. And another. My grandkids love their carrots. Greg banged the gavel. This is not open for debate, he snapped, but Ellie, never raising her voice, sighed. With respect, HOA law requires member input before a vote can be finalized. Greg's face went pale. He knew she was right. The vote was held, ballots were passed. One by one, people checked the boxes. It wasn't unanimous. But it wasn't close either. The amendment failed. Greg didn't look at us when we left. But Richard, the board member who had warned me, smiled and gave a small nod. Back home, we sat on the porch, sharing a cup of tea like always. The moon was high, and the garden smelled like basil and night air. Ellie leaned back. I didn't expect that, she said. The support? People don't always speak up, I said. But when it matters, they remember what counts. And, from that point on, no one tried to shut us down again. Even after the vote failed and the amendment was dropped, we knew it wasn't over. The stand stayed up. People still came by every weekend, some leaving more money than they needed to, some just dropping off handwritten notes saying thank you. Ellie and I tried to go back to normal, watering the garden, jarring new batches of jam, restocking the little donation tin. But something hung in the air, like a cloud that hadn't yet decided whether it was going to rain. Greg hadn't spoken to us since the meeting. Not a word, but you could feel him watching. He stopped walking his dog past our house. He didn't respond to Ellie's follow-up email with clarification about the stand's legal standing. And then strange things began again. One morning we found our mailbox left open, not just open but bent. Another day the stand had a crack in one of the legs, as if someone had kicked it when no one was around. Ellie fixed it like she always did, without complaint. But I could tell she was watching now, closely. She started keeping notes, times, dates, photos. I didn't ask what she was doing with them, but I trusted her. The final straw came when we got a notice in the mail, not from the HOA, but from the county inspector's office. It claimed we were running an unlicensed agricultural business and would need to cease operations immediately or apply for a commercial vendor's permit, which would cost us thousands of dollars and require zoning changes that were almost impossible in our area. I stared at the letter in disbelief. Ellie took it, scanned it, and muttered, "They escalated." "You think Greg did this?" She nodded slowly. "He's using county connections now, hoping pressure from above will make us stop. So what do we do?" I asked. She stood, opened her laptop, and began typing. "We don't back down." Not yet. The next day, Ellie made calls to people I didn't even know she still had in her phone. Old colleagues from her legal days, a former commissioner, a journalist she once helped during a food access case. She sent emails with attachments. She started writing a statement, not just to the HOA, but to the county board and the zoning commission. She worked late every night that week. I handled the garden and the stand. Every morning, people still came, asking what was happening. "Is it true you're getting shut down again? I thought you won? They can't do this, can they?" Ellie told them gently, "Not if we keep showing them what matters." A few days later, a journalist showed up. A woman from the local paper who had heard about the legal back and forth. She interviewed Ellie, asked for a tour of the garden, took photos of the stand, even bought a jar of jam. The article ran 3 days later with the headline, "The stand that fed the neighborhood and the fight to keep it alive." That changed everything. More people showed up the next weekend, not just to buy, but to show support. Someone brought flowers. Another woman, teary-eyed, said, "I used to think all these rules were good, but seeing what you're doing, it made me question what really matters." Even Greg couldn't ignore the wave of attention. He called a special HOA board meeting to discuss escalating tensions between neighbors. But before the meeting happened, something else arrived in the mail. It was a letter from the county's office. An official one, signed and sealed. Ellie opened it slowly, read the first paragraph, and smiled, for the first time in days. "They're dropping it," she said. "No permit required. They're calling it an exempt activity under the community agricultural use clause." Looks like my old arguments still hold up. "So it's done?" She shook her head. "Not yet, but we've just won a big one." That weekend, people came in even bigger numbers. One neighbor brought handmade signs that said, "Support local food." Kids set up a lemonade table next to our stand. It became less of a farm stand and more of a gathering place. Laughter, conversation, a kind of quiet joy. The kind that felt rare these days. Then Greg showed up. He wasn't smiling. He never did. But this time, he wasn't wearing the usual crisp polo or holding a clipboard. He was just standing there, hands in his pockets, watching from across the street. He didn't say a word. Just stood there for a few minutes, then walked away. Ellie watched him go. "He's not finished," I said quietly. "No," she replied. "But he's losing control." And she was right, because the more Greg tried to tighten the grip, the more the neighborhood pushed back. One man, a longtime resident, sent an open letter to the HOA board demanding transparency and accountability. A small group of neighbors formed a petition asking the HOA to formally recognize the farm stand as a community asset. People were tired, not just of the rules, but of the fear that came with them. Ellie stepped back during all this. She didn't want the spotlight. She wasn't trying to become the face of a movement. She just wanted to grow food and share it, but something else was happening. People started seeing her not just as my wife, not just as the woman who ran the jam table, but as someone who reminded them of what quiet strength looked like. And in the middle of all this, rules, fights, newspapers, she was still out. In the garden at sunrise, humming softly while she picked green beans. That night, as we sat outside, I asked her, "You ever regret leaving your old job?" She thought about it for a long second. "No," she said. "I used to fight in rooms full of people who wore suits and forgot what food tastes like when it's grown with care. Now I fight with soil under my nails and people who know the value of a tomato. That feels more real. I nodded. Do you think Greg knows who you really are yet? She smiled. He's starting to. The next week, a notice was delivered to every home in the neighborhood. Greg was stepping down as HOA president. No reason given. Just a quiet announcement that he would no longer be serving on the board after the next month. People said it was the pressure. Others said he was asked to resign. We never found out for sure, but one thing was clear: the tide had turned. The neighborhood was never quite the same after Greg stepped down. Some people whispered that he left out of embarrassment. Others said the board forced him out to calm tensions. No one knew for sure. What we did know was that things felt different, lighter. The tension that had clung to our quiet little street like heavy air had started to lift. The farm stand was still running every weekend. The eggs were fresher than ever. Ellie had perfected a new blackberry jam recipe that people were raving about. And more than that, neighbors who used to stay behind their hedges were now stopping to chat, even linger for a cup of lemonade. Children played near the sidewalk while their parents exchanged recipes and gardening tips. It didn't feel like just a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a community, but that's when something unexpected happened. One morning, a letter arrived addressed not to Ellie or me, but to the farm stand neighbors. It was an invitation to attend a local conference on urban agriculture and food access hosted by the State University. The keynote speaker? My wife. I looked at her, holding the envelope in my hand. You didn't tell me about this, I said, half laughing. She shrugged. I wasn't going to go. Why not? You're literally the reason they're having it. She gave a small smile. I didn't do it for attention. I just wanted to protect what we built. I leaned against the counter. Maybe it's time people know who you are, so she agreed. We both went. It was the first time in a long while that I saw her standing on a stage, holding a mic, speaking to a room full of strangers. But when she started, you could hear a pin drop. She didn't talk about legal battles. She didn't list her wins in courtrooms or name-drop the nonprofits she used to work for. Instead, she told the story of a simple farm stand that fed a neighborhood, and how rules built to protect a community were being twisted to divide it. And then she said something I'll never forget. When people are allowed to share what they grow, they don't just share food. They share stories, they build trust, they remind each other that they belong to something bigger. That's what happened on our street. That's what's possible everywhere. The applause was long and loud. And after the talk, people lined up to speak with her. Some wanted legal advice. Others just wanted to hug her. One woman even cried, saying Ellie reminded her of her late grandmother who used to hand out peaches from her porch. It became clear to me that Ellie's impact went far beyond our neighborhood. When we got back home, things only got better. The HOA elected a new board. This time, they included a few people who had signed our petition and stood up at the community meeting. The tone of the emails changed too, less demanding, more thoughtful. They even began asking for community input. Before making rule changes, and the biggest surprise, a proposal to make the farm stand an official community sharing site, a designated spot in the neighborhood for local grown goods and neighbor-to-neighbor exchange. Not just for us, but for anyone with surplus produce or homemade food. Ellie, read the proposal out loud, eyebrows raised. They want to name it after us, she said softly. I looked at her. Well, we did kind of start the fire, she laughed. Let's not call it that. Let's just say we reminded people what matters. Months passed. The stand stayed open. Other neighbors started their own versions, a small herb table, a kid's lemonade corner, even a handmade soapbox run by a retired school teacher. The sidewalk became a living thing. The street came alive. Not loud or messy, but rich, like the soil Ellie always loved working with. One day, I walked out and found a young man setting up a folding table at the edge of his driveway. He looked nervous. I smiled and walked over. First time? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, I've got extra squash and some basil. Thought I'd give it a try. I patted him on the shoulder. You'll do fine. Just make sure your sign's got heart. He looked confused. Heart? You'll know what I mean, I said, and walked back home. That night, Ellie and I sat on the porch like we always did. The sky was streaked with gold and pink. The garden smelled like mint and warm earth. She leaned against my shoulder, quiet and content. I never thought it would go this far. She said, I did, I replied. She looked up. Really? I nodded. I know who I married. She smiled, eyes soft. So do they now, she whispered. I watched the wind move through the tall sunflowers we planted in spring. The same ones Greg once claimed made the street look too rural. They swayed gently, golden heads bowed in the breeze. For the first time in a long time, everything felt still. Not empty, but settled. Like we had finally rooted something that would grow long after us. And in that quiet evening, I realized something. It wasn't just a farm stand anymore. It was a symbol of what happens when people stand up, when they push back not with anger, but with clarity, kindness, and a deep sense of purpose. And the reason it worked was because my wife, quiet, thoughtful, strong, never forgot who she was, even when they did.